Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Metal Matt podcast. As always, I'm your host, Metal Matt. So let's go ahead and get things started. In this episode, we are going to be doing a retrospective on probably the best prog metal band of all time. Dream Theater. Yeah, we're going to be doing one on Dream Theater. That's going to be pretty cool and epic. But first of all, let's do some shout-outs as we always do. First of all, Chucky's Playground, great place to be. Just a fantastic Chucky site. If you haven't, if you haven't signed up yet, definitely check it out because it's really cool. It's really amazing. It's just a great place to hang out. So definitely check it out. And Movie Mayhem with Spanky and G. Great podcast done by my good friends. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do so. Just a really entertaining podcast. They just do all kinds of movies. And it's just really entertaining to listen to. It's just so cool. So definitely check that out as well. So today we're going to be talking about Dream Theater. And the way that I first heard Dream Theater, it's a little bit different from what I've usually done. Like usually it's from Guitar Hero, and while Dream Theater actually wasn't a Guitar Hero game, that's not necessarily how I discovered them. How I discovered them is this was around the time of the Black Cloud and Silver Lining album. And I first heard Pull Me Under like on the radio or something, like online on YouTube somewhere, and I really liked it. And then I learned that they had a new album coming out, and I really wanted to check it out just out of curiosity to see what else this band had done. And with that album, I was hooked from then on. So it's been a pretty cool journey to kind of go through all of these Dream Theater albums. So I guess we can go ahead and get things started with their very first album, When Dream and Day Unite. And this is one of those debut albums where, I'll be honest, it's not really that good. And it's really a shame because I do want to like this album. I really did want to like this album. But, it's just not really that great. It's not really that interesting to listen to. And a lot of that really does come down to the singer, and the singer on here is Charlie Dominski, and his voice really does not fit Dream Theater, at least at this point. Like, I don't know, it's something about his voice. It just seems a bit too. I don't know. His voice just seems a bit too soft and a bit poppy for a progressive metal band like Dream Theater. Like drummer Mike Portnoy compared it to what would happen if Billy Joel sang for Queensryche, and I think he's pretty spot on with that. His vocals on here, it really does remind me of Geddy Lee from Rush in a lot of ways. But I don't know. His voice really doesn't fit. And I find some of the instrumentals on here, which is the Yates Jam. I think that's how you say it. I don't know how you say it, but that instrumental, it's definitely really good. I find that the best track on here because he's not singing on it. I mean, I know that sounds harsh, and I know it does, but I just really do not like him as a singer. I don't know, I just didn't find him very interesting. He just did not fit the style of Dream Theater. So I was not a huge fan of his singing on this album. I wasn't a huge fan of his vocals on here. And the songwriting in general here, it's not really as polished as it will be in the future, but it's not really that good. But you can tell that they're trying. You can tell that there's potential to the songwriting. You can tell that there's talent there. You can tell that it's going to be something one day. It's just not as polished as it's going to be. But in this album, it's just really forgettable too. I don't remember that much about it, other than it being their first, and other than it being pretty lackluster. I remember A Fortune in Lies, which is the album opener, being pretty good. And like I said, the Yates Jam is pretty good as well. It's pretty good instrumental, and Status Seeker is fine. Other than that, there's not a lot going for this album. It's just not very good. It's not very engaging. So, I don't know. It didn't really hold my interest. So, I mean, if you're curious as to how Dream Theater got their start, I'd say listen to it at least once. And I would really only listen to this album at least once, because this album just was not interesting at all. It wasn't intriguing. So Dream Theater sort of got off to a bit of a lackluster start. And then we go to Dream Theater's second album, Images and Words, and this was released in 1992, a few years after the first album, which was released in 1989. And by this point, Charlie Dominski ended up leaving the band, and James Labrie ended up replacing him. And, James Labrie, he'll go right up there for me as one of the greatest replacement singers of all time. Because James Labrie is by far better. He's by far a better singer for Dream Theater. He definitely fits the prog metal a lot more, and I think he really adds to the sound, honestly. He'll go up there with guys like Brian Johnson of AC/DC and guys like that in terms of replacement singers and stuff like that. So, Images and Words. This is probably technically their best one, and in terms of favorites, I would probably put it at the top. I would probably say this is my favorite Dream Theater album. Just a lot of great songs on here. They really stepped up their game for this one. They really improved amazingly. The songwriting is a lot better this time around. It's just great, honestly. I really can't really say enough about how awesome this album is. And you got Pull Me Under, which is definitely Dream Theater's biggest hit. It's probably most well-known song. And it's just really amazing. It's pretty much the typical Dream Theater song, their typical sound. And it also has a Beatles homage right at the end, and that's always cool. And you got Take the Time, which is pretty cool. And by the end, it actually gets really cool, but unfortunately, that's when it ends. And I kind of wish that particular part lasted a little bit longer. But it's still a pretty good song. And Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle and the Sleeper, is awesome. And we'll end up getting reintroduced to this particular song later on, but we'll get to that when we come around to it, but it's still real cool. Another Glass Moon's really cool. And Learning to Live, which is the longest song on the album at 11 minutes and 30 seconds. Pretty cool, and that's another thing about Dream Theater. Like, their songs are long. Like, they're a progressive metal band. It kind of goes with the territory, But, I really don't know what else to say about this album. Just a really awesome album, by far their best one. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. It's by far their best one. Most definitely. It's just classic prog metal. This is the quintessential Dream Theater album. And so then we move on to their third album, Awake. And this was released in 1994. And this one is pretty interesting because this is an album where it gets really heavy. I think at the time, this was probably Dream Theater's heaviest album to date at that time. It's just a really metal-oriented album, and that was because of the record label that they were on at the time, because, they had a hit with Pull Me Under, and their label wanted more stuff like that, and so they wanted a more metal-oriented album, because they thought that it would be really easy to market. So, this was released at the height of grunge, so you never really know whether it was going to do well or not. And it actually peaked at number 32 on the Billboard 200, which was at the time was the highest charting album for the band. So, in essence, it kind of did well in that sense, but unfortunately, the record label considered it a commercial failure. But and it even then received mixed reviews. But honestly, I think this is actually one of Dream Theater's more underrated albums. I do think that this is really a really cool album. Like Caught in the Web, I think it's really catchy and really cool. And then we have like this really amazing musical suite called A Mind Beside Itself, which consists of 3 parts, considering it has Mania, then the second part is Voices, and the third one is The Silent Man. And all 3 of them like do like different facets of Dream Theater music. You know, the first one is an instrumental, pretty much is what it is. Then Voices, which is just this really heavy kind of song, and then The Silent Man, it's sort of calm, more epic. So I think that whole musical suite on this album is pretty cool. And Scarred, which clocks in at about 11 minutes. It's pretty much the Learning to Live kind of song on this album, and that's really cool as well. And 6 o'clock is cool. So, yeah, and like I said earlier, this is definitely a more metal-oriented album. It's definitely the heaviest album they had done. It's certainly heavier than Images and Words. And, like, in some ways, it sort of is a continuation of Images and Words, but at the same time, they're sort of moving into that more heavier kind of thing. And I just think it's really cool. I think it's one of Dream Theater's more underrated albums. I don't know why it doesn't get talked about a bit more. I think it should, because it's just awesome. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Like both Images and Words and this one. I think I really recommend these 2 particular albums because they are awesome. And before I move on to our next album, let's go ahead and talk about an EP that they released the year after Awake called A Change of Seasons. And we're just going to talk about this EP pretty briefly because it is an EP, and while it's not necessarily that important, we don't really usually talk about EPs or live albums or anything like that on the show. But if it's significant at all to the band's history, I'll talk about it at least briefly. I would say this one is a bit important as well, because it has one of their best songs, A Change of Seasons. And this was actually pretty cool. I really like Change of Seasons, and it basically has all these different parts of it. It's basically a musical suite, more or less, just put into all one song. And the song clocks in at 23 minutes and 9 seconds, and it's one of Dream Theater's longest songs. And it was written by German Mike Portnoy about the death of his mother. And it's just a really cool song, really emotional, it's just an epic song. Pretty much, like, when you think of Dream Theater, you'll think of, like, epic, grand songs. And this one is pretty much it. Like it consists of 7 parts. And you got part 1 is The Crimson Sunrise, 2, Innocence, 3, Carpe Diem, 4, The Darkest of Winters, 5, Another World, 6, The Inevitable Summer, and 7, The Crimson Sunset. And so it's just definitely, it's a quintessential Dream Theater song, a classic one. The opening, the intro to it, the guitar intro to it is just absolutely amazing. Probably one of my favorite intros to a song ever. I just really like the guitar, just the mood it sets for the song. And so in the EP itself, the rest of it just features covers that were performed live. Not really anything that spectacular or anything like that. They're fine, but really what it's all about is the Change of Seasons song. And it's really amazing, and you can find it on YouTube. Definitely check it out. Just check out that song in particular off the EP because it's really amazing, and it's by far one of Dream Theater's best songs. So now we officially move on to their next full-fledged album, and that's Fallen into Infinity. This was released in 1997. And, I'll be honest, it's not really that good. This was really the first Dream Theater album since the first one to kind of just be like, it's not really that engaging, the band were sort of pressured by their record label after what they perceived as the commercial failure of Awake. They wanted them to do shorter songs. They wanted them to do radio-friendly kind of songs, and you can kind of tell that's what they're trying to do, but they're also trying to keep their prog metal edge. And I think the combination doesn't really work very well. What it kind of reminds me of is, Super Collider. You know what I mean? It's just like that kind of Super Collider kind of thing where, the band wants to write a radio-friendly album, but at the same time, they're trying to keep, their metal edge. And the combination, it doesn't really work out too well. And, I think I would say they're on par, I don't know. It's just I'm not a big fan of this album. With that said, there are bits and pieces on this album that I do like. There are songs that I do like. Like Burn My Soul, I really like. That's by far my favorite song on the album. And when you really think about it, when you really listen to it, it's pretty much more or less a ripoff of Pull Me Under. It really is, but at the same time, it's just so cool. And when it comes to this album, I'll take whatever I can get, And we have Hell's Kitchen, which is a cool instrumental. We have Anna Lee, which is pretty decent, and You Not Me is a decent song. We have Trial of Tears, which is sort of a musical suite on this album. And because it's of 3 parts: 1, It's Raining; 2, Deep in Heaven; and 3, The Wasteland. And it all adds up to 13 minutes, and that's a pretty solid closing song. But yeah, other than that, it's just not that great. It really is just sort of trying to be radio friendly, but trying to be metal, trying to stay in that prog metal mindset at the same time. And I just don't think it works very well. So, for me, I'm not really a big fan of the album. I would say it's probably one of Dream Theater's weaker albums. So then we move on to their next album, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. And this was released in 1999, and this is definitely a huge improvement on Falling into Infinity, by far. Just in every way, shape, or form. And like I was describing earlier about Metropolis Part 1 from Images and Words, this is a sequel to that particular song. They built upon the world explored in that song, and they made it an album. And this is a concept album. And I just really like this one. This is one of my favorite Dream Theater albums. It has a pretty cool story going for it. And it revolves around a man named Nicholas who's going through therapy, past life regression, I believe it's called. And he kind of goes to like a past life, and he sees a girl named Victoria, and she just feels really familiar, and that she was murdered, and all kinds of stuff happens. I don't want to give away everything that happens in it. I really don't, because this is really an album you really have to experience to really get it, I really just don't want to give it away, because you have to hear it. You have to hear it, because it's definitely one of Dream Theater's best. I mean, there's all kinds of great songs on it. We have Fatal Tragedy, Beyond This Life, Through Her Eyes, Home, The Dance of Eternity. It's just all kinds of great songs. It's basically a really good Dream Theater album. One of my favorites. I can't really say anything more. All I can say is, go listen to it, because I highly recommend it. It's a great concept album. Ranks up there with stuff like Pink Floyd's The Wall and Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime. Just has great concept albums. If you haven't heard it, definitely check it out. It's just a really amazing album. And so then we move on to 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And this was released in 2002. So Dream Theater's first album of the new millennium. And, this is actually another pretty cool album. And this is a really cool album because, at first, the first track begins with the ending of the previous song on here, which is Finally Free, and it ends with the same sound effect that ended that song. And this is something, it's a trend that's going to continue on future Dream Theater albums. At least for the next 3. They'll start where it ends. It's kind of, a cycle kind of begins in a way. And we also begin a new suite for the band, and this is basically called the 12-Step Suite. And this is Mike Portnoy and the drummer Mike Portnoy. He wrote this about being a recovering alcoholic and all, and it's about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff like that. So for the next several albums, there's going to be like these suites here that'll consist of 2 or more parts, and all of them are just really cool. The Glass Person in particular is really good. It consists of 3 parts: 1 Reflection, 2 Restoration, and 3 Revelation. It's just really cool. It's a really cool opening to the album. I just really like it. And Blind Faith is really cool as well. And The Great Debate is a very interesting song. It's about stem cell research. And one cool thing that I like that the band does is that they don't take a side in it. They're not for it or against it. They're just kind of showcasing the debate and letting the listener come to their own conclusion about it. And the music of it is really cool because what it reminds me of a lot, it reminds me of Tool. It reminds me of something that Tool would have done on the Laterius album, or however you say that album title. But, it reminds me of something that Tool would do. And I think it's really interesting in that regard. I think it's a really cool song. But the thing about this album that really sticks out to me the most is the fact that it's a double disc album. It's a double album. And the entire second disc of the album is pretty much more or less one song. And it's 42 minutes long. And when you think about it, it's really, technically, Dream Theater's longest song they've ever done. Technically speaking, like, it's separated into 8 different songs, really. But, it's pretty much one song, really. It's pretty much a musical suite, more or less. But it's broken up into 8 movements, and they all focus on different, like, mental afflictions and stuff like that. Trying to think of what all of them do. And there's an overture which serves as an introduction and goes through all the musical themes that happen. And About the Crash, and there's 2 versions of About the Crash on here. There's a normal version and there's a reprise of it, and both of them focus on different people. This one, the normal one, it focuses on, I think, the dad of a girl with bipolar disorder. And the reprise focuses on the girl herself with bipolar, and it's pretty interesting. And then War Inside My Head, which is the 3rd movement, it tells the story of post-traumatic stress disorder, like soldiers do after war. And then we have 4, which is the test that stumped them all, and it talks about schizophrenia. And then 5, Good Night Kiss, which is about postpartum depression. Then we have Solitary Shell, which is pretty much about autism. And then the 8th one is Losing Time, which is about dissociative identity disorder. And then we have the grand finale, which is attached to Losing Time. And this is just really good. It's a really good song. Probably my favorite Dream Theater song, just for the sole purpose that it is 42 minutes long and that it really is just really engaging. They really could have put it as just one song on the album, and I would have been fine with it. It's just a really good song. It's really engaging. It really does keep your attention, honestly, just because it talks about so many things. And you think it would be crowded, but it's really not. I think they do a good job of, keeping your attention with it, just making the music so good. As far as what my favorite musical movement it is in here, I'm really not sure. About the Crash Reprise, I really like a lot. Good Night Kiss, I like. Losing Time, I really like, especially when it gets to the chorus of Losing Time. And I wish that it lasted a bit longer because it is so good. It's such a good chorus. But really, the entire album is just really fantastic. The song itself is fantastic, but the album itself, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, the album, is just really good. Again, much like Awake, one of their more underrated albums, I think. Doesn't really get talked about a lot, but I think it should because it's a really amazing album. Just really cool, very interesting. So definitely check it out, or at the very least, check out the actual song, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. It's probably the best way you could spend 42 minutes. And then we have Train of Thought, and this came out in 2003, and the 2003, Magic Strikes Again. 2003, my favorite year for music and entertainment in general, honestly. Just a lot of great albums came out that year, and this is one of them, Train of Thought. And one cool thing about this one is that it's probably Dream Theater's heaviest album. And I know I said that for Awake, and that's what rings true as well, but I think this is way heavier than Awake. It's metal to the bone, really. Like, the first song starts with As I Am, and that's pretty heavy as well, and This Dying Soul, which I believe is part of the 12-step suite. And yeah, and that one's really cool as well. And Honor Thy Father is cool. Stream of Consciousness, which is their longest instrumental to date. It's 11 minutes and 16 seconds, and it's just a really cool instrumental. I really like it. In the Name of God is a really cool way to end the album. So, and there's really only 7 tracks on here, and that's sort of a running kind of thing with Dream Theater, at least for some of their albums in the 2000s, in which they really only had 7 songs or 6 songs, but they're really long songs. So, but I do think that it does hold my attention more or less. I do think it's really good. It's really heavy metal kind of thing, but mixed with progressive metal at the same time. It's heavy progressive metal, I guess you could say. And I do think it's really cool. Again, an underrated album. Doesn't really get talked about a lot, but it should because it is really metal. It's really heavy. Just a really cool album. So then we move on to Octavarium. Octavarium, I guess that's how you say it, but this came out in 2005, and I have to admit, I'm not really the biggest fan of this album. This was really the first album since Falling to Infinity to kind of disappoint me, and it's not a horrible album by any means. Like, it's not as forgettable as, say, Falling into Infinity or the first album. But, I don't know. I was expecting more from this album. And I didn't really get what I thought I was going to get, honestly. But, it doesn't mean it's bad. Like, I do think that there are some great songs on this album. The Root of All Evil, which is a continuation of the 12-step suite. This has 6 and 7, Ready and Remove. And that's pretty cool as well. And then we have Panic Attack, which is a really cool song, really pounding song, really heavy. And it almost reminds me of something that could have been on Train of Thought. It just has that kind of heaviness to it. And then you have the final song, Octavarium, which I believe is technically Dream Theater's longest song that they released. And it clocks in at 24 minutes, so I think it's technically, as far as full songs go, Dream Theater's longest song. Like 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is technically the longest one, but it's broken up into movements, so I guess it doesn't really count, I guess, but this one is all one full song. And it really is just amazing. On a disappointing album, this is really the song that really saves the album, because for the most part, I wasn't really digging the album that much. Like, there were a couple songs like The Root of All Evil and Panic Attack that were really cool, but then Octavarium comes in and it just saves the day, you know. It has 5 movements in here. 1, Someone Like Him. 2, Medicate, Awakening. 3, Full Circle. 4, Intervals. And 5, Razor's Edge. And all of them pretty much tell different stories. Like, 1, Someone Like Him, it talks about, you know, a person and what they want to do in their lifetime, and they don't want to be like a normal person. They don't want to live a normal life or anything like that. And that's a really cool way to begin it. And then we have Medicate, Awakening, and it's about a doctor and his patient, and it's really cool. Then we have Full Circle, and this is really, it's basically an ode to everything progressive rock. You know, it has, you know, references to Pink Floyd and Beatles and various actors and bands and stuff like that. It's just really cool. Then we have Intervals. Then we have Razor's Edge, which is emphasizing the cyclical nature of all things. And it uses the same melody as the Into the First track, so it's sort of cyclical, really. So yeah, Octavarium, kind of a disappointing album. It's a bit of a step down from Dream Theater's past albums. I wouldn't really say it's as good as, you know, what came before it. But at the same time, there are some good things on it. Like the title track is just amazing. It definitely saves the album. But then you also have Panic Attack and The Root of All Evil that are pretty good. So I think it's a solid album. Not quite as good as the ones that came before it, but it's decent. And then we move on to Systematic Chaos. And this was released in 2007. And, you know, this is actually, and again, much like Train of Thought, this is actually one of Dream Theater's heaviest albums. Like, I'm not sure which one would be heaviest. I mean, I would probably go with Train of Thought, maybe. But I think this one could also take the cake as well, because this is a really heavy album. And again, just really underrated. And it begins with In the Presence of Enemies, Part 1, which is a real cool one. And it also ends with Part 2 of In the Presence of Enemies. And I think Part 1 of In the Presence of Enemies is a bit stronger than Part 2. But Part 2 is fine. We have Forsaken, The Dark Eternal Night, and we have Repentance, which is the second to last movement of the 12-step suite. Part 8, Regret, and Part 9, Restitution. And Repentance is actually really cool because it has voiceovers from everybody who, it has, I guess, spoken words from a lot of notable musicians. And I think they're like apologizing for stuff. And like in the song, like Repentance, you know what I mean? Like spoken word apologies. And some of the guests include Corey Taylor of Slipknot and Stone Sour. You got Steve Vai, Chris Jericho from WWE and Fozzy, David Ellefson of Megadeth, Joe Satriani, Mikhail Katerfeld of Opeth, John Anderson of Yes. So, you know, you got a lot of really cool musicians making cameos on this one. And I think Repentance is by far the best song on the album. It's just really cool. And then you got the Ministry of Lost Souls, which is really cool as well. So, I mean, there's not really much to say about Systematic Chaos. It is what it is. It's a great album, a really heavy album. I would say check it out. I do think it is an improvement upon Octavarium. And then we move on to Black Clouds and Silver Linings. And this was released in 2009. And like I said at the beginning of this, this was the first Dream Theater album in which I was really looking forward to. By this point, I knew who Dream Theater was, and I was really looking forward to their album. And this did not disappoint. I think this is one of their best albums, honestly. But that might just be for sentimental, really, because this was the first Dream Theater album that I ever fully listened to, so it's going to stick with me. But I do think that there are some really cool songs on here. Like A Nightmare to Remember, I think that's really cool. A Rite of Passage, which is the lead single to it, and this is pretty cool. You got Wither, which is sort of a melancholy kind of song. And then you got The Shattered Fortress, which is the final part in the 12-step suite. And you got part 10, Restraint, part 11, Receive, and part 12, Responsible. So it finishes up the 12-step suite. And overall, the 12-step suite, really cool. I would say try and listen to that. You know, just one day. If you have any free time, check it out. Because this is really cool. All put together, I think it lasts about an hour or so. But it's probably the best hour you could possibly spend. This is really cool. And you have The Best of Times, and then The Count of Tuscany. And The Count of Tuscany is probably my favorite one on the album, and it's also the longest as well, at 19 minutes and 16 seconds. And it's pretty cool, and it's also probably one of the silliest Dream Theater songs that I've ever been, because some of the lyrics are a bit kind of goofy in a way, and James Labrie sings them really over the top, but I do think that it sort of adds to the charm of it. This is a really cool kind of epic song. So yeah, overall, this one I really like. I just really like the themes that this album has, because it just describes all kinds of difficult moments or disturbing moments, and I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of us can really relate to stuff like that, and I just think it's a really interesting album. Certainly one of my favorite Dream Theater albums. I would definitely recommend it. I think it's just a really cool album. And so then we get A Dramatic Turn of Events, and this was released in 2011. And this is the first Dream Theater album to not feature Mike Portnoy. Mike Portnoy, who was one of the founding members of the band, and was more or less the front man for the band, really. Because he was the one that would sort of represent Dream Theater in interviews and stuff like that. He was more or less the front man, really. Like the leader of the band, I should say. And so he ended up leaving, like, he wanted to take, like, a bit of a break from Dream Theater, but Dream Theater didn't want to do it, so he just decided to leave. And you can tell that Dream Theater is affected by this on this album. Like, they're sort of lost on this album in a way. Like, this is probably the first kind of disappointing album since Octavarium. I would say this one is a bit weaker than Octavarium, really. And, like, the new drummer that they got is Mike Mangini. And he doesn't really do much to really kind of bring his own thing to the table, at least on this album. Like, if you told me that Mike Portnoy played on this album, I probably would have believed you. Because he doesn't really do anything to differentiate himself from Mike Portnoy. And, you know, it's just not really that good. Like, I think the lineup that they had, which was, James Labrie on the lead vocals, John Petrucci on guitar, who's like the heart and soul of the band, really. Then you had Jordan Rudess on keyboards, John McGunn on bass, and you had Mike Portnoy on drums. And for me, that was their best lineup. That was my favorite lineup of Dream Theater. But with that said, That's not to say that there aren't any good songs on here, because there are. On the Back of Angels is really cool, and again, it's sort of trying to be Pull Me Under once again. They're trying to kind of capture that spirit of Pull Me Under. And while they don't quite get it, I do think that this is a really good song. And then you have Build Me Up, Break Me Down, which begins with an electronic intro, which is sort of weird because Dream Theater never really does that, so it kind of took me for a surprise. But the actual song is actually really good. And then you have This Is the Life, which is a really grand, epic song. It's sort of kind of like slow and stuff like that. Sort of like slow moving, but it sort of just reaches this epic crescendo by the end. And it's just a really good kind of song, you know. But other than that, most of the album is pretty forgettable. You know, you can kind of, like I said, you can kind of tell that Dream Theater is a bit affected by Mike Portnoy leaving. I don't think they were prepared for that to happen. So they're sort of lost on this album. So it's really one of their more forgettable albums, I'd say. Maybe not horrible by any means, but just not that interesting. And so then we move on to Dream Theater. This was a self-titled album, and this was released in 2013. And this was a self-titled album because they wanted to emphasize that they were moving forward in their career. And the album songs are, and this is a pretty interesting album as well, because the songs here, for more or less, are shorter than they have been, which is pretty interesting to see, you know. But, yeah, this is a real cool. It begins with a great intro, False Awakening Suite, and it's only 2 minutes long, but it really just has a great intro. It lets you know the kind of mood that the album is going for, and it's just a really awesome intro. Then you got The Enemy Inside, which is really pounding and heavy. And this is the first album in which Mike Mangini really starts to differentiate himself from Mike Portnoy, finally. Like, he really shows his own unique style to it. Whereas on the previous album, A Dramatic Turn of Events, you can kind of tell that he was just going through the motions and he was just playing Portnoy style. Here he really begins to separate himself from the pack. He does a really good job on here. Personally, I don't think he's as good a drummer as Mike Portnoy, but I think he's a solid replacement at best, you know. But The Enemy Inside is very cool. Then we got The Bigger Picture, that's cool. Behind the Veil, that's cool. And then we have probably a really interesting suite called Illumination Theory, and this clocks in at 22 minutes and 17 seconds. So classic Dream Theater here, and it consists of 5 parts. You have Paradox de la Luminaire Noire, and this isn't a 1 minute instrumental, just basically the intro to it. Then you got Live, Die, Kill. Then 3, The Embracing Circle, which is another instrumental. And The Pursuit of Truth, and Surrender, Trust, and Passion. And it's a pretty cool song. While I do think that it kind of goes on a bit longer than it needs to, I do think it is a pretty good song. It's a pretty good suite here. And I think it's the first musical suite that they've done since Portnoy left the band. So it's really cool to see them do something like that again. So overall, the self-titled album, not great, but I would say it's a pretty good one. They're still recovering from Portnoy's departure, but I think this is a step in the right direction, more or less. Then finally, we are at their latest album, their album that just came out today, The Astonishing. And, you know, I have to say, I was really impressed by this album. I really was. You know, when I first heard that they were doing this kind of an album, and it's another concept album like Scenes from a Memory, but it's a lot more grand than that one. And that's really what separates this one from other Dream Theater albums. I really think that this is the one where it's a lot more ambitious. It's probably the most ambitious album they've ever done. And I think that's really cool. I think that's what really separates it from the rest. And the story here, and it's a concept album, I've seen from memory. And the story here, it's a simple good versus evil story. The concept around it is that it goes around a band of rebels trying to defy the oppressive empire. It's basically Star Wars, basically. You have the Great Northern Empire, which are the villains. You got Emperor Nefarious, Empress Arabelle, Darius, and Fate. I think that's how you say it. And they represent the Great Northern Empire. And then for your heroes, who are the Ravenskill Rebel Militia, you got Evangeline, Gabriel, Alexander, and Aritz. I don't know how you say it, but it's Aritz. I guess that's how you say it. I don't know, but yeah. So it revolves around those 8 main characters and what they go through. It's basically a good versus evil story, but I do think that Dream Theater really adds its own twist on the story, and I think it's really cool. And it's probably I believe it might be their longest album that they've ever done, because this clocks in at 2 hours. So, make of that what you will, Like, you sort of do have to be, like, in the right kind of mood to sort of listen to this album, because it is 2 hours long, and it is a concept album, so you do have to listen to all of them in order. But, yeah, with that said, I do think this is a really great album. It's probably the best since Black Clouds and Silver Linings. I just found myself really enamored in the story of the album. I really found myself being more engaged in the music than I was with the past couple of albums. I do think that this is the best post-Portnoy Dream Theater album, by far. I do think this is really good. They sort of pick up where they left off, really. And, it has some great songs on here. Like, you got The Gift of Music, and then Moment of Betrayal, which were the 2 singles that were released before this one. But you also have some really cool ones. You have Our New World, which is really cool. It's really catchy as well. Hymn of 1,000 Voices. Trying to think of what else. A New Beginning. I don't know. It's just a really good album. I can't really do it justice. And Brother, Can You Hear Me? Ravenskill. Those are other good songs. I cannot do this album justice by just talking about it. I just really can't. And John Petrucci came up with the story and lyrics and stuff like that. And then the music was composed by him and Jordan Rudess, which is he does keyboards. I do think that they all do a good job of doing the music and the lyrics and stuff like that. I just cannot put it into words as to why this album is just great. Like, it's just something you have to experience. It's like Scenes from a Memory album. You really just have to experience it to kind of know it. You know what I mean? And while it might take it might take like a couple listens to kind of really get enamored into the story and stuff like that. Well, it might take a couple of listens to kind of get used to it. When you do sort of get used to it, it becomes really good. So overall, The Astonishing, really good album. Dream Theater's best in quite a while. I definitely recommend it. Go out and listen to it. Right now, it's my favorite album of 2016, sorry. But it's my favorite album of 2016 so far. But we're only in January. It could very well change by December. Like, Rob Zombie has a new album coming out in April, and it could very well take that place. But right now, The Astonishing by Dream Theater is my current favorite album of 2016. I just really love it. I absolutely recommend it. If you're a prog metal fan, if you're a Dream Theater fan, definitely check it out. Don't let the running time scare you away or anything like that. Don't let the 2-hour running time scare you away. It's just a really great album. It's just really amazing. Definitely check it out. So that is all for the Dream Theater retrospective. And Dream Theater are just this consistently amazing band. They've definitely made some more good albums than bad. And while there are a couple of bad albums, the good for sure outweighs the bad. They're just a really amazing prog metal band. They're really the first band that I think of when I think of prog metal, and that's really cool, I would say. So Dream Theater, I absolutely recommend them, especially if you're big into prog metal or prog rock or whatever, I would definitely recommend them. Go check them out because they're just really amazing. So that is all for the Melmat podcast this week. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.